Hi everyone. I'd like to give you just a brief summary of this book, this great book on discernment called What Does God Want? A Practical Guide for Making Decisions by Father Michael Scanlon. So first of all, I want everyone to notice the subtitle of this book, A Practical Guide for Making Decisions. So these decisions could involve a vocational decision, like should I become a priest, a religious sister, or should I be married? But it also includes other decisions like what college should I attend, or what job interview should I go for, how many kids should we have as a couple. Whether you are embracing a vocation and living that out now, or you're still trying to figure that out, this book has something to offer you. A big part of this book are what Father Scanlon calls the 5 C's of discernment. I'm just briefly going to go through each of them. Again, this is just a brief treatment of the book. I highly recommend you get this book and read it. It's got a lot of great personal examples and things like that. But I just want to briefly talk about the 5 C's of discernment. So, first C of discernment is, does this decision conform to God's will? So you can call it the conformity test. In other words, is this vocation or is this decision a legitimate vocation or decision? Does it go against the will of God in nature or in his revealed law? So for example, if you're thinking about being a fraudster or some criminal activity, or if you're thinking of doing that for a living, it doesn't conform to God's will, so you can easily cross that off the list. So that's the first C, is the conformity test. Fairly straightforward, hardly doesn't need to be mentioned, but it's there. The second C is conversion. In other words, does this decision that I'm about to make facilitate my growing closer to God, my conversion, and not just for myself, but for the people around me? Does it facilitate that, or does it take me away from God? And does it drag other people away from God as well? Now, some decisions involve a person, say, making a lot of money. That's not a bad thing. Money in and of itself is not evil, but in choices like that, a person needs to really pay attention and to be careful why they are acting on a certain decision. Is it because of the money? Is it because of the fame? Or is there something deeper? That's the second C of discernment, conversion. Does it facilitate my growing closer to God as well as the people around me? If it does, that's a good indication that this decision is something to be pursued further. The third C of discernment is the consistency test. So this decision, or this vocational decision or occupational decision I'm about to make, does it keep popping up in my mind in prayer, specifically during prayer? Because if an idea keeps popping up in your mind while you're being distracted or being extra busy, chances are that's not from God. I'm talking about when a person's in a state of prayer, a state of peace, tranquility. What thoughts come to mind during that state? If certain thoughts consistently come to mind, that's also a good indication that you can pursue those. But also the consistency test applies this way. Is it consistent with the person you are? Did you consistently get good marks in art class, for example? And did people consistently compliment you on your artwork? So if it's consistent with who you are, because God, he very much works with our nature. And if it's part of us, if it feels right, if we're able to roll with it, if it's consistent with the person God created us to be, that's also a good indication that we can pursue this further. On the other hand, if the decision or the thing I'm thinking about is out of the blue, it just came out of nowhere, and I thought about it only 8 hours ago, doesn't mean that it's a bad decision. It just means that more care and attention need to be paid to taking a look at whatever that is. The fourth C of discernment is confirmation. In other words, do the signs around me confirm the gut feeling I have about this? Now, here's a huge caveat. This usually works after a period of discernment. In other words, after a period of prayer, of seeing a spiritual director, of discerning, what are the signs then? Do they confirm what's been going on inside me or not? If a person looks for confirming signs too quickly, or if they look for signs before going through a process of discernment, it doesn't usually work. It kind of turns God into a sort of an 8-ball or a genie in a bottle. God doesn't want us to forego the work of discernment. He wants to walk with us through that. So that's the fourth C, is what are the signs telling me, the external signs, after a process of discernment? Do they confirm my decision, or does it leave me more confused? The last C is the conviction test. Basically, it's this. Does it feel right? Do you have a good gut feeling about this? Now, we have to be careful here as well, because conviction does not necessarily mean certainty. Conviction just means I have enough to go on to take the next step. Not the next 4 steps, but the next step. For example, do I have enough peace and serenity and confirming signs that I should take the next step and try out a year in the seminary or ask the person out on a date? Again, it doesn't necessarily mean you know that you have 100% certainty, but it means you just have enough to take the next step with the Lord. So those are the 5 C's of discerning God's will. Obviously, they're meant to be taken all into consideration at once. It gets problematic when we take one of those things and look at that apart from the other 4. And lastly, again, this is only a brief summary of the 5 C's of discernment. I highly recommend you picking up a copy of this book, What Does God Want? A Practical Guide to Making Decisions.